So very quickly, it, like we know that today, this edition is Father's Day edition. So it's really, we are going to be talking a lot about men, but there's something, I promise you, the ladies who are in the room, there is something for you at the end of the day. So we are being very balanced and making sure that everyone's needs is catered for. So we are going to look at what is trauma. How do men respond to trauma? Is there This is one of the things that I began to dig into as well. I've always known it somewhere in the back of my mind, and it made sense. But as I began to prepare for this over the last several weeks, I've delved more into, is there evidence that men respond to trauma in a different way from what the way women do? And the answer would interest you. And then we're going to look at pornography, gambling, and gaming. We're going to look at suicide. We're going to look at how to break free, how to support people who are struggling with any of these conditions. Just to take off the work addiction, I was speaking to a men's group, I think exactly a week ago, a church men's group, and I was saying that one of the things that us men do that a lot of us are not even aware of is that sometimes we use work and business to mask trauma. Basically, when things are too painful, rather than address them, one of the ways we do is to bury ourselves in work and put in all the long hours in order. But really, so work can actually be a means of treating or of masking pain and trauma. I think that's just what I'm going to say. It's just drop it there that work that, can actually become something else. It can be could I ask that we please mute ourselves, please? Anyone who's not talking, please mute yourself so that we can all have a pleasant time listening to this. So I think that's all said. And in terms of rage and violence, we also do know that sometimes, in fact, to be honest, the more, particularly young men, the more young men I see who are dealing with rage, who are dealing with anger management issues, the more I'm clear and convinced that there is certainly a very strong link with trauma, because some of the people that we see who are acting out, who are getting involved, even that includes gang culture as well, and that's something else that we are going to feature at some point. I'm just trying to source the right person. Gang culture and helping our sons to stay on the straight and narrow. That's something that we are going to feature at some point in the Tripart care hubs. So, and then we're going to look at resources. So let's start from what exactly is trauma. Trauma really, it's because what we are saying, the whole essence of tonight's meeting, or the theme of tonight's meeting, is that some of the things, it's unmasking build trauma. And what we are saying is that some of the habits, some of the undesirable things that we see in our men, in communities and in society, some of them, it's actually showing that they are victims. We see them as we see sometimes we think it's bad behavior, but maybe we should begin to see it that those people are trapped and they're actually the victims of their past. And so let's look at that. Trauma plays a very prominent role in all of those things. So trauma is it's about it's an emotional wound, and it results from either a single event, a series of events, or some circumstances. And that could be physical abuse, it could be emotional abuse, it could be bullying, it could be sexual abuse, it could be even growing up in poverty, it could be growing up with one parent or the other being absent, it could be growing up in a family where one's needs has been invalidated, or where one's needs was not acknowledged. It could be growing up with a parent who had a mental illness, and as a result, they could not really offer the support and the nurturing that somebody really requires to develop well. So, and whatever that is, whatever the event or series of events, it's such that it makes the person feel that they are at risk of physical or emotional harm, or that their life is being threatened. And it's all well and good if that happens, and it's like water off the back. But it becomes a problem, and often that's the case, that it then has a lasting adverse effect on the way the person functions, and that includes mental functioning, physical, emotional, or spiritual well-being is then adversely affected. And simply that's what trauma is. So something happens, it's an event, series of events, life circumstances is overwhelming, and it's such that it then leaves a wound, such that that wound is then carried, if not addressed, it then spills to every aspect of life, particularly for the future. And it then begins to affect one and play out in different ways. And what we are saying tonight is that a lot of the trauma that people experience, that when men experience trauma, some of the things that we see that we castigate, some of the behaviors that we frown at in society, if we look deeper, a lot of them have very close links, and I'm going to share those statistics. So the next thing is that we know without a doubt that there is a strong association between particularly childhood trauma that happens in the early years of life in childhood up until the person crosses into adult. Any trauma, there's what's called adverse childhood experiences, for instance, which is some of the things that I've talked about earlier. When that happens, that person is more likely to be to suffer from addictive behavior, particularly if there was no compensation in their lives, if there was no source of comfort, if there was nothing to compensate for those difficult experiences. And so an addiction is something that quickly results, that is associated with those traumas, and it could be a behavior, it could be a substance, it could be an activity or a habit. That's the addiction now. And usually it causes physical, emotional, financial, spiritual harm. But it only becomes an addiction when there's a compulsive craving. It just feels like the person is aware that it's causing all this harm, but despite that, they are still doing it. For instance, somebody who is engaged in pornography, it's affecting their marriage, it's eating into their relationships, they are staying up all night and not able to perform well in their careers, in their businesses, in their life generally, because they are chronically sleep starved. It's affecting somebody who is gambling, it's affecting their finances. They're having to borrow money to continue to gamble. They're in trouble with the law, but they still continue because it's an addiction, because there are certain changes that have taken place in the brain, and some of them we are going to refer to. So there's an uncontrollable urge, despite the fact to engage in those activities, despite the fact that they are aware that it's causing harm. The other thing, of course, is that they now need higher doses, more of those activities, more of those behavior, more of those habits, in order to get the same buzz that they used to get from that activity. And at some point, the buzz, there is actually no buzz again. They don't feel any, it doesn't do anything, but the problem is that even when they then try to stop the activity, they find that they are emotionally, there are physical and emotional consequences and distress, psychological distress that occurs. That's called withdrawal. And the final thing is that the habit then takes over their life entirely. It's almost like, so you find people who are there are people who say that they would actually at work, they will turn into pornography sites. They will gamble at work. They will go on to get betting sites at work. They will want to do their gaming at any time and any free time they've got, and that will mean that they are staying up all night doing gaming. So all of those will suggest that there is an addiction going on. And so what's the link? What do we know? Because that's the whole thing, that we are unmasking. We are unmasking trauma. That we are looking beyond the trauma, and we are looking beyond the behavior and seeing that there's a trauma driving it, and what can be done to help people who are in such condition. And perhaps, like I said, there are people who are listening who have logged in because they really feel that they're in a position, they feel they can identify some of these conditions. I'm just going ahead of myself now, but it's probably the most important message that I'm going to put out there tonight, that please get help. Please speak to somebody. Addictions thrive on secrecy. That's what addictions thrive on, the first on secrecy. And that secrecy causes a lot of chemical chaos in the body. It causes a lot of stress. And for as long as one is trying to cover it, it's really just going to become stronger and stronger. So the first step is to please get help, speak to somebody, confide in somebody. That's the road to recovery. So, all right. So, what do we know about trauma and addiction? We do know that somebody who has had that people who have substance misuse, any substance misuse disorders, that particularly when they're addicted to substances, that generally 3 to 4 times they are more likely to have experienced trauma in their lives, particularly in childhood, than people who are not. And that when somebody has had adverse childhood experiences, they are 6 times more likely than somebody who hasn't to develop alcohol addiction problems. And like I said, both substance misuse problems and addiction problems are going to be tackled in July. I think it's the 23rd of July by an eminent psychiatrist who is in our community. So an addiction psychiatrist. So the other thing we do know about trauma and addiction is that men who have had those type of adverse childhood experiences are twice as likely than those who have not to be involved, to be dependent on alcohol. And for substances, they are 5 times as likely to be dependent on substances. That's heroin, ketamine, cannabis, cocaine, any of those things. And also for gambling, that 50 to 70% of people who seek help for their gambling actually report adverse childhood experiences. I'm sharing all these things so that we can change our attitude from being judgmental to being compassionate and being empathetic, to really looking beyond the behavior to see, because the behavior only lives, but we've got to get to the root of the matter to really be able to support people and help people to recovery. And we do know that there's clear links between pornography and childhood sexual abuse. That people not only are people who have had childhood sexual abuse more prone to then developing problems with pornography, they are also more prone to having other sexual disorders generally. So emotional neglect and abuse is another one that has been linked with increased risk of pornography. And interestingly, a boy or a young man who has seen his dad abuse his mother or his female partner is 10 times as likely to become a perpetrator of domestic violence themselves. That's huge. They are 10 times as likely to become perpetrators of domestic violence. And then there's also the link in terms of, we do know that adverse childhood experiences, social isolation, loneliness are all linked with gaming addiction. And just to let us know as well that officially gaming disorders, compulsive gaming behavior is now officially recognized by the International Classification of Disease. That's like the Bible it's like the Bible of mental health diagnosis. It's now officially recognized as a problem, as a disorder. So, right. So what do we know about still trauma and addictions? We also know that when people have had personal trauma, trauma, there can be community trauma. Maybe there's a flood, or maybe there's maybe there is Greenfield, for instance, the fire disaster. That was a community trauma. Sometimes there's a flood, there's tsunami. The tsunami was a community, but when people have a personal one, when it's personal, like an assault, physical assault, abuse, it tends to be more impactful in terms of creating this addictive behavior. One of the reasons is probably that when it's community, everybody comes together and they support each other. When it's individual, that person sometimes bears their load by themselves. And the other thing we all do know why there's an association between trauma and addiction is because the link in terms of sometimes people are using the addiction, the drugs, the alcohol, the pornography, the gambling, the games to actually treat the distress. or to mask it. Sometimes it's to numb pain. Sometimes it's to reduce anxiety. Sometimes it's to actually numb the pain, the memories, the nightmares, the flashbacks that occur as a result of that trauma. So, and when we are aware of these things, when we understand why some people do what they do, I think it helps us to approach things from a point of compassion. And the other thing to bear in mind is that really we do know that all of those addictive behaviors actually cause a rewiring in the brain networks. Literally, there are changes that take place in the wiring. It's electrical circuits in the brain is changed as a result of some of those addictive behaviors, and which we are going to get to as well. Um, and so initially, people start off using that habit maybe to escape. Maybe a child is being molested perpetually, and that's the escape. Maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's addiction, maybe it's gaming, maybe it's even porn. It's used as a form of escape. But over time, as the brain begins to change, then they find themselves held captive. Basically, they find themselves in the clutches of those addictive behaviors. It's more complex than that, but for in lay language, that's a very easy way to talk about it. So the next thing is, do men and women actually respond to trauma differently? And the answer is yes. We do know that research shows that men are less likely to seek support and to seek treatment after trauma. I'm sure you can relate. We brace up and chin up and pull ourselves together, pull our socks up, and not ask for any help or not talk about it. The number of men who are in their 50s or in their 60s who have maybe after the third or fourth consultation that I've been seeing them suddenly confess to or admit or not admit or disclose childhood sexual abuse that took place when they were 10 or took place when they were 5 years old. I've lost count. And they then say, oh, I've never told anyone before. But that it's playing out in their lives. It's affecting the way they show up. It's affecting the way they do relationships. It's affecting their own marital or spousal relationships as well. So really, the men respond men respond to trauma differently than women do. Men are more likely to respond showing the fight or flight response, and that means that's really there's a neurochemical chaos. The body is almost always on alert, and that can only serve for a short period, because after a while, then one would have to look for other ways to deal with it, and sometimes the outlet becomes an unhealthy habit. The other thing we also know is that the dominant male hormone, testosterone, is linked to more psychological arousal, but however, it's also linked to less emotional labeling. Emotional labeling means that one is able to feel distress, but one also has the language to articulate it. So whilst women are able to articulate the feelings and the emotions, I feel angry, I feel deflated, I feel lonely, I feel isolated, I feel sad, I feel excited. Um, whilst women are more able to have more of those language, and we do know there's also research showing that when we're able to articulate those things, we actually there's a relief that it causes. That one of the first steps towards being able to manage emotion is to be able to articulate it, because naming that emotion by itself is already a point of relief. It already sort of brings relief and calms things down. So the other thing we do know is that whilst women tend to when trauma takes place, women will usually manifest it in post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, guilt, and fear. It's all internal. It's all internalized. Men tend to externalize it in terms of risk-taking behavior. Some people are living with men who are always. It's almost like they always like to live life on the edge. It's almost like, even some of the things that we look at, even some the things that we just think, oh, that guy is just, is a maverick. He likes maybe road rage. Even maybe people who like to just drive very fast. They just like the pause. Some of those things are more than they look on the surface. They're actually ways to try to deal with unaddressed trauma, violence, compulsive behavior, and we've talked about porn, and sometimes we've talked about also sometimes avoidance in terms of work, using that as a distraction. And so basically, men usually equate emotional expression to vulnerability and vulnerability to danger. So when we're not emotionally intelligent as men in terms of we're not in touch with our emotions, on the overall, men have been raised to equate emotional expression to vulnerability and vulnerability to danger. And danger is counterintuitive to self-preservation. So you can see why men will usually resist emotional vulnerability. So now we're going to look very quickly at some of the behaviors in detail. And I think this is really very poignant. It says this guy, Amazing Kane, he does a lot of work with men, particularly with Christian men. I was reading a statistic that actually shows, I'm not sure, I think it's out of America, that shows that there was a survey carried out and up to seven out of 10 men actually admitted, and this was carried out in a Christian community, which just shows really, it shows you that it's a huge problem. That 7 out of 10 men actually admit to struggling with pornography. Personally, I don't. From what I see, and from my professional life, I personally don't believe that it's that high. But that's just my impression. Those figures come from somewhere. But but really, I think the message here is that men don't run to porn because they love it, but because there's something that hurts, and porn appears to be a quick fix. That's I think that's something to carry with us and to think about and to mull over. So, what does pornography do to the brain? We do know that over time it will shrink the front part of the brain, which is the most executive part of which is the executive part of the brain, which is the most highly functioning part of the brain, and the part of the brain that affects this, that's responsible for decision making, impulse control, self-control, emotional regulation. We now know that the gray matter, the nerve cells in those areas of the brain, that front of part of the brain, over time begins to shrink when somebody engages in pornography habitually. In fact, they also say that there was a test carried out, and they found out that for somebody who spends 4 hours per week, that when they carried out tests that they carry out on people with Alzheimer's, that their score in terms of planning and impulse control was similar to somebody who has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And that's not to scare us, but it's also to encourage anyone who might be in that position to really seek help. It's not innocuous. Pornography is not. It doesn't come. It's not without its consequence. It's not just it's not. It's more than looking at it from a spiritual point of view. It's actually damaging globally, in terms of career, in terms of life generally. It affects intimacy because people who engage in it now find that nothing excites them. They can't be played. They can't have satisfaction from a normal intimate relationship that should take place between a man and a woman because um, the screen life has become the real life, and what happens on screen cannot be reproduced in real life, and that becomes a problem. And we also do know that the more somebody engages in it, the more they're entangled. And as I was thinking about the Second Corinthians, for those who are people of faith, who read the Bible and who are believers, one of the things I said earlier is that Tripart Care is a Christian organization. We have a Christian ethos. I'm a believer myself, and also a minister of the gospel. But so the scripture that comes to mind is 2 Corinthians 10:3-5, where it talks about the weapons of our warfare not being carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down strongholds. And as I think about that, and we now know that in neuroscience, the more enmeshed a network of nerve cells are connected to each other, the more entrenched that habit or behavior is. So when I think about that sort of struggle, I just think about what's happening in the brain as well. And that's another place where science so nicely endorses scriptures. Not that scripture needs anything to endorse it anyway, but I'm saying that this one way, another thing that happens. So because of the shame and secrecy that is associated with pornography as well, people find it causes it's stressful, and so on it's almost like 24/7 there is a neurochemical chaos taking place. All the stress hormones are raging in the body, and those are not without consequence. They have their own physical consequences, and just really it's almost like somebody is keyed up. In fact, people say that even sometimes it can become so apparent that it's apparent for people who know the person well that they're carrying the weights. They might not, they might become socially awkward as well, because of the guilt and the shame that is associated with it. Just to differentiate between guilt and shame. Guilt says that I have done something wrong. But as guilt progresses into shame, it actually says you are something wrong. There's a difference between the two, because I've done something wrong. I can move on. I can put the past behind me. But if I'm something wrong as a result of what I did wrong, then that's a problem. And pornography is associated with shame. It's not just guilt; it's shame that it's almost like the person feels that they're something wrong themselves. Um, and the sleep disruption associated with it as well means that when people are not sleeping well, um, there's hormonal disruption. It affects all sorts of things. There's just the body as a system is not stable and functioning right. When when somebody is chronically sleep deprived, and of course, it also makes them more at risk, because when we are more sleep deprived, we are less likely to say no to the things that we would have said no to. The reality is that when you're having a late night, that's when you are less likely to say no to unsavory things that you wouldn't have probably have said. You would have been able to say no to previously, and that includes unsavory snacks, sweets, and all of that. And like I said, it also lowers satisfaction and connection in marital relationships. If I could just check in, can people still hear me and everybody still here?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you, because I know it's just very quiet. So thinking about how does one break free? How does one, the reality is that for all addictions, one of the things that keeps people the most is that they give it every other name except of what it is, which is an addiction. To be able to say, actually, I need help here. I'm not able to manage this by myself. I need to reach out. Or people will call it every other name except what it is, because that's part of the addiction. It's a problem, but it is an addiction, and it's important to admit that and to name it and say this is actually an addictive problem, and I need help here, and confide and seek help. And I've said it's that both professional and pastoral. I don't think one should exclude the other, and people know that that's always. And interestingly, I saddle both worlds. So I remember now that I remember that I giggle. I remember a TV presenter once asked me, "Where do you want your patients to see you? Do you want them to meet you in church, or do you want them to meet you in your clinic?" And I said, as a professional, my patients should be in my clinic. But I'm just saying that it's both worlds. You cannot, one cannot, one does not preclude the other. In fact, both of them should work together. I think one cannot underestimate the power of spiritual help, and particularly prayer in breaking free from those addictions. The other one is the power of identity. In terms of, we know that people who have a sense of purpose, one of the things that one can do in walking free from pornography addiction, for instance, is identity, changing the identity of that shameful identity that I am wrong, I am what is wrong. No, and being able to, and that change can come over time. It's people know that one of the things I very strongly endorse is meditation on scriptures, because that's able to change who we really are. It's able to change our perception of ourselves and see ourselves in the way that we really are and that God sees us. And that can be profoundly helpful. I know that question is going to come up at some point, so I just thought I would address it up front now. So my approach is approach from both sides, approach from both the professional and pastoral viewpoint. Recovery is a journey, not an event. So it's important to bear that in mind, particularly for people who are supporting other people. Identifying the root cause, that's the other thing. Most, like we said earlier in that plaque, that people are not running to pornography because they enjoy it, but because it's the quickest way to fix a pain. And that pain is usually stress, boredom, loneliness, rejection, or control. Usually, bottom line, when you dig well enough, and if there's anyone who is probably saying, oh, you are reading my dossier here, really, this is my life. One of the things you can do is when did this habit actually start, and what were you trying to make it, to use it for? Because self-medication, most pornography is self-medication at the end of the day. It's trying to treat something with the wrong approach. It could be, like I said, it could be boredom. And that boredom is not just boredom of time. Sometimes it could be boredom of time, but sometimes it could be boredom of life, not having a sense of direction or purpose. Because usually one of the things that they encourage people to do is there's no void. That void has got to be replaced, and it's got to be replaced with something meaningful and purposeful. It could be sports, it could be gym, it could be, but it's got to be that void. That free time cannot be there, because as long as it's there, it's going to be used it's going to create vulnerability. And also it's about understanding what makes you vulnerable. Is it certain sites? Is it certain apps that are on your phone sometimes? And one has got to have a draconian approach in sometimes deleting numbers, sometimes deleting apps, sometimes even some people go as far as actually sharing one. Of course, the first thing is disclosure, in terms of disclosing to, if somebody is married, disclosing to a spouse would be I would say, the first place. And sometimes it's about giving that person full access to the phone, so that it's just putting the hurdles in place such that one is not putting oneself in a place where one becomes vulnerable. And also understanding vulnerability, even things like late nights for people who are prone, then those are things to watch out for. It's also about cutting ties, identifying the triggers. What is it? Is it loneliness? Is it? Do you use it to treat anger? Do you use it to? What is that? What's that thing fulfilling in your life? And of course, getting accountability. There's clear evidence showing that when people are in an accountability group where other people have these similar conditions, that they do a lot better, and that they can support each other. That's where the alcohol and anonymous comes from, backed up with a lot of evidence of effectiveness. And also replacing unhelpful habits or harmful habits with helpful ones. So now I'm going to split it up a bit. Compulsive gaming disorder, basically, like I said earlier, gambling. We've always known that gambling is a disorder, but it's classically like every other addictive behavior. And some of the warning signs could be when somebody is always running out of money when they really shouldn't be. When people are borrowing, because it's addictive, people will borrow to gamble. When there's some secrecy, when people they can't leave their phone lying around. All of those things can be meaningful, can be warning signs, or they're just very guarded or tensed around their phone. Those are warning signs. And we do know that gambling, for instance, is associated with increased risk of depression, anxiety, alcohol, substance misuse, and suicide. It can create problems in relationships, create problems in society, in careers, in the legal issues, financial problems. All of those things are associated. And sufferers, interestingly, are not often aware that it's a problem. Like I said earlier, they don't usually admit that this is an issue. So, and it's also commoner in males than females. Treatment, therapy, support groups, including Gambling Anonymous. And like I said, um, just take it as that every of these conditions, pastoral support will be really very key. And all of the things I've said about pornography also apply to gambling as well as gaming. Gaming is the new boy in the block. It's not as new because we've always said that, at least I think I would say maybe for the last 10 or more years, there's been growing concern. And then in the International Classification of Disease, 11th edition, which is the Bible of psychiatry, it's now been accepted that actually gaming can become a disorder. And it's also common among young people, young men who are lonely, who it's almost like that's their world. And they then form a bubble, and progressively over time, that becomes their life. Recently, I was listening to one of the leading neurobiologists globally, Professor Andrew Huberman, and he was talking about a son of his friend who, by the time Andrew Huberman encountered him, he basically had no life. Basically, he was in his man cave was his life. He was playing video games round the clock, and it interferes with life, interferes with relationships, interferes with eating, even things like food, and other normal desires of life. They just become relegated to the background. It's almost like when they're in that zone, there's nothing else that matters. So it can take a substantial amount of waking time and also eating to sleeping time, and of course the health declines physically and physically and mentally as well. Also links with depression and anxiety. And usually, when that has persisted as a pattern for 6 months, that up 12 months, that's when it becomes a problem. I'm not going to say much on suicide, and that's because we've done quite a bit on suicide. The last 3 or 4 Septembers, so there's quite a lot on the Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub YouTube channel. We've done a lot of things, 2 or 3 videos on there about suicide, and there's also the E-motion video. That's HE motion, talking about men's emotion. So I would recommend that to you. But just to say that there's clear evidence associating male suicide with childhood trauma. And it's a very complex situation. It's not as easy as it looks. And it's important that we extend grace and compassion. And that brings me to this next point, next slide, which is very often, I think I still added recently, very often people say, I'm not a professional, I'm not a mental professional. Yes, I think it was last week whilst I was at this church men's Zoom. After I finished speaking, somebody said, look, I'm not a mental professional. How do I support another man whom I know is going through distress? And this is something that Tripart Care created, I think it was in 2024, 2023. It's called the Emotional Distress Conversation Checklist, and it's an ABC, very easy to learn. The first one is authenticity. We don't need to be professionals to be human, but we need to be human to really be professional. But we don't need to be professionals to be human. And being authentic, being able to step into somebody else's shoes without any mental training is what men need the most, in terms of just being a body who hangs out there and says, I'm in this, I'm sitting in this with you. And I am curious, I'm really here and genuinely here. I'm not speaking from a script. It's not about being scripted. It's about being human and being present. And the other one is being cautious, particularly men. We are very quick we are solution providers. We are husbands, we are fathers, we are pastors, we are church leaders, we are career leaders. We sit in the boardroom, we call the shots, we are professionals. So whenever there's a problem, we're already thinking of 1,001 ways to solve it. But sometimes that man is not, he has thought about 1,001 ways. He just needs somebody to listen. I think we need somebody to please mute themselves. I can hear some background noise there. Thank you for doing that. So being cautious not to jump in, and that's something we have to conscious. Even as a professional, as a psychiatrist, it's something I intentionally do when I'm having social conversations, particularly speaking to men who are in distress. To really be present, they are not, and to be non-judgmental. I'm just really being conscious of that, not to, and just to be there to listen. The other one is confidentiality. Confidentiality is a golden rule. People are not going to open up except they know that their secret is going to remain secret. And sometimes people will actually test you. Men will, let's test him with this much of information and see how he responds. Whether whether I'm going to hear that from a third party or whether I'm not. So it's important to bear that in mind as well. That sometimes it's people would, and the only reason why one should break confidentiality, and it's usually a mutual agreement. If I'm going to break confidentiality, I would say it will be because that person's life is in danger. Obviously, if you confide in me and say that there is suicidal plan or suicidal attempt recently, then I wouldn't keep that to myself, because it's not possible in the community to be able to hold that by myself. But we would agree on breaking that confidentiality together. And if you need support, I'll do that. But it's just about thinking about those things. So because, like we said, addiction festers most on secrecy. And confidentiality, it's a very important issue when it comes to people wanting to confide and wanting to divulge that. Distractions is another one, in terms of putting away distractions, and the number one distraction is this one. Is the number one distraction that we have to deal with: television, gaming, and the others are but the phone is so really letting people know, making eye contact and letting them know you've got my full attention, you've got me, I'm right in this space with you, and I'm not going anywhere. And sometimes it means planning ahead, um, really thinking ahead about having those conversations and where one is not going to be distracted. Exchange, it's really about being able to, a person who is going to be frankly must show himself frankly. And in all of those conversations, it's important to be able to hear one um, part of yourself as well. The reality is that when we speak to men, coming as the professional and the expert does not really work, because that man is not looking for another expert. He's looking for a friend. He's looking for a confidant, and a confidant who is also as vulnerable, who is also as human, and who has a pain point in his life. And being able to share that in one way or the other, um, can be helpful in sort of leveling the playing field. The other one is obviously being frankly, um, really genuinely being body language, open body language. All of those things are very important. And of course, the final one is gratitude. If every time somebody rings me up or sends me a WhatsApp message or sends me a message and says, oh yeah, they want to reach out, and they actually disclose something or share something, as a rule, a good way to end, and I try to do that, is to end with gratitude and say, thank you for confiding in me. Because thank you for not bearing this alone. At the end of the day, you are doing everyone a favor by confiding. And that's something that I appreciate. You could have continued to bear your burden, and holding me in confidence is something I take very seriously, and then planning next steps. So still supporting people with addiction, be compassionate and show empathy. Being judgmental only drives people away. And the reality, this is reality. Sometimes in church, we are not. So I think there are several reasons, but sometimes in church we are not as compassionate. Sometimes we can be judgmental, and it just drives people away. And I'm aware that there are several leaders here today from all walks of life. One of the things that we can do, apart from being non-judgmental, apart from showing empathy and compassion, is to educate ourselves, to learn about those conditions, about gaming disorders, about pornography, and then when the speaker comes next month, about alcohol and substance addiction. It's important to know those things, because then we can come from the place of information. We can know that it's not that they're not pulling themselves together or not trying their best up or putting effort. And the other thing we can do is to be the custodian of their hope. Being a hope custodian, I think it's really very important. And so in terms of resources, the Unchanged Black Book, the guy that I quoted earlier, is written something particularly for men who are dealing with pornography. He's written a book. He's called it the Unchanged Leader Black Book. And if we have people like that, one of the things we could do is to actually get them the book, um, sow that into their lives, invest into their lives. There's a National Center for Gaming Disorders, believe it or not, and here in the UK, I think it's up in North London, where they actually give family therapy, individual therapy, group therapy, support parents of people who have a gaming disorder. A lot of parents are now aware that that's possible, that there's actually support for parents as well. The Royal College of Psychiatrists is always a go-to in terms of information. And why am I like this? How to break cycles, heal from trauma, restore your faith. It's a journey of trauma written actually by a lady. And that's just in terms of dealing with trauma and how to make recovery. The phone fix book, for those who, because the phone as well, social media can be one of those addictions. We haven't talked about that today, but there is a social media video on Tripart Care YouTube channel. We did that, I think, would have been about 2 years now, August 2024, thereabout. So there is a full video like this on there that you can check. And the other one, I've got this book actually, the Phone Fix book. It's written by a consultant neurologist, Dr. Faye Bagetti. It gives a blow-by-blow account of how to find out whether you're actually addicted to your phone or to social media and what to do about it, blow by blow. And that's Tripart Care YouTube channel. And how to help men talk about emotions. That's also another YouTube video on Tripart Care. I think that's still one of our most viewed videos on Tripart. It still continues to be viewed. So for those who may be in that position, how do I talk to the men in my life, the spouses, the brothers, the uncles? How do I talk to them, or how do I talk to a man about his emotions? That video is a good one to check out. The Four Friends video, we are not going to see that today. So those are the things. I'm beginning to round up now. I'm quite aware of time. Those are the things that Tripart Care does in terms of trauma-informed care, coaching, executive coaching. We deliver workplace and well-being consultancy. We support churches, charities, delivering training to your volunteers and to your leaders. And keynote public speaking is something that I particularly enjoy. And so if you've got an event and you want us to speak, as you see that we've got a lineup of very engaging speakers. I'm sure that people still, for those who attended last month, still getting feedbacks about that very gripping and powerful presentation by Dr. Olaro. So then those are the things that those are the themes that we can deliver training on, either corporately or to your church group or to your charity. And those are the events on the horizon. 19th September 2026, we are going to have another church and charity leaders mental training series. And that's going to be it's going to be a Saturday morning, 3 hours of just, the last one was really, I left with a lot of inspiration, lots of vulnerability in the room, both church leaders, men and women, really rubbing minds together and really it's a safe space to talk about the things, the challenges of leadership, particularly as it relates to leading ourselves, but also leading the people that we've been called to lead in and taking care of their emotions. So emotional intelligence courses for, of course, for newly wedded and engaged couples it's coming. We are still gathering all the content, but it is coming. It is coming. The Tripart Care Mind Gym course as well. We ran one in 2021, 2022, 2023. It's also still on the horizon. It's there. Right. So yeah. So June 2026, 23rd of July, next month, the Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Hub for next month is going to be facilitated by Dr. Ajayi. And Dr. Ajayi, as I've said, is my favorite addiction psychiatrist. He's been in the field for, I think, nearly 20 years now, if not more, in terms of addiction psychiatry. And he is a psychiatrist, but he spent a lot of his time in addictions. And it was for some of us who've been around for a long, long time with Tripart Care Hub, will remember that he was here, I think, in 2022 or 2023. So we are bringing him back, and he's very gladly obliged to be with us. I've known Dr. Ajayi for, I think, about 50, over 50 years. So, and I'm looking forward to um, hosting him on the day. So please spread the word. This e-flyer is now going to go live now, because now that we are concluding today's event, we can then release it. So you can take a photo of that and start spreading the word. And those are the future dates for the Tripart Care Emotional Wellbeing Herbs. Workplace bullying is something we are working on. There is somebody I have in mind already, and we just need to approach them and make sure that they're happy to come, and we'll be talking about it. And they are eminently qualified and nobly recognized for being able to talk about workplace bullying. When you meet them, you understand what I'm saying, but they are nobly qualified to talk about that. So that's our Instagram page. So please follow us on Instagram. Our Instagram is very eminently managed by Covenant, who is doing a brilliant job. So those are the WhatsApp groups. That's a generic WhatsApp group. Anybody can join that group. If you take a photo of that, it will lead you to the group, and then we can admit you onto the group. So just take a photo of that, the QR code, and this is for ministers. So here we have a different conversation in terms of really supporting ministers. And for the ladies in the room, I did promise that we've got something special for you as well. So please stay tuned. That's our book club. And for those who were here last month, and you heard Dr. Awolaran present, Dr. Awolaran runs the book club, and she does a brilliant job of it. We are currently rounding up on the Body Keeps the Score. Okay. And then, so thank you for listening. That's this part of that's my what do you call it? My contact details. Facebook, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the place where I hang out the most these days, and of course, because of Tripart Care, on YouTube, Instagram, and that's our email address. And so for the ladies, people will probably remember that I announced this would have been, I think, the March or the April of Tripart Care, about the Oasis Holistic Women in Ministry retreats. If you're a lady who is in ministry, you're a female pastor, you're a lady in leadership, or you're a wife of a pastor, this is an event you don't really want to miss. It's taking place from the 14th to the 16th of August 2026, and it's going to be hosted eminently by Reverend Mrs. Omishade, who has several years in ministry to her belt, and is also corporately qualified in several worlds. It's going to be a time of rest and encouragement, spiritual renewal, and it's Latima, Divera Latima. So all you need to do is to go to www.atinokomishade.com. I would have been registered from yesterday if I qualified. And there's also another one, a transformative holistic weekend. This is from the 11th to the 13th of September, and this is in Reading. So also the details are on the website, or you could send an email to that email address. This is really for people who just want a period of, you just want to recharge yourself, you just want to be away from the maddening crowd to refresh yourself, because very often we carry other people. Women do as much as men. We carry other people, and sometimes we don't always remember to refill our cups. So both of these events come very highly recommended. I can't recommend them enough. Like I said, if I was qualified, I would have registered since last year. So thank you for listening.